Welcome back to Rockford Reading Daily. We are continuing to read The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. We are currently on page 77. Still trying to get this mic situation all the way figured out. So, bear with me, please. Okay. All right. With all their larger vision and deeper sensibility, these men have usually been conservative, careful leaders. They have seldom been agitators, have withstood the temptation to head the mob, and have worked steadily and faithfully in 1,000 communities in the South. As teachers, they have given the South a commendable system of city schools and large numbers of private normal schools and academies. Colored college-bred men have worked side by side with white college graduates at Hampton. Almost from the beginning, the backbone of Tuskegee's teaching force has been formed of graduates from Fisk and Atlanta. And today, the Institute is filled with college graduates, from the energetic wife of the principal down to the teacher of agriculture, including nearly half of the executive council and a majority of the heads of the departments. In the professions, college men are slowly but surely leavening the Negro church, are healing and preventing the devastations of disease, and beginning to furnish legal protection for the liberty and property of the toiling masses. All this is needful work. Who would do it if Negroes did not? How can Negroes do it if they were not trained carefully for it? If white people need colleges to furnish teachers, ministers, lawyers, and doctors, do black people need nothing of the sort? If it is true that there are an appreciable number of Negro youth in the land capable by character and talent to receive that higher training, the end of which is culture, and if the 2,500 who have something of this training in the past have in the main proved themselves useful to their race and generation, the question then comes, what place in the future development of the South ought the Negro college and college-bred man to occupy? That the present social separation and acute race sensitiveness must eventually yield to the influences of culture, as the South grows civilized, is clear. But such transformation calls for singular wisdom and patience. If, while the healing of this vast sore is progressing, the races are to live for many years side by side, united in economic effort, obeying a common government, sensitive to mutual thought and feeling, yet subtly and silently separate in many matters of deeper human intimacy, if this unusual and dangerous development is to progress amid peace and order, mutual respect and growing intelligence, it will call for social surgery at once the delicatest and nicest in modern history. It will demand broad-minded, upright men, both white and black, and in its final accomplishment, American civilization will triumph. So far as white men are concerned, this fact is today being recognized in the South, and a happy renaissance of university education seems imminent. But the very voices that cry hail to this good work are, strange to relate, largely silent or antagonistic to the higher education of the Negro. Strange to relate, for this is certain, no secure civilization can be built in the South with the Negro as an ignorant, turbulent proletariat. Suppose we seek to remedy this by making them laborers and nothing more. They will not cease to think, will not cease, excuse me, let me try that again. Suppose we seek to remedy this by making them laborers and nothing more. They are not fools. They have tasted of the tree of life, and they will not cease to think, will not cease attempting to read the riddle of the world. By taking away their best equipped teachers and leaders, by slamming the door of opportunity in the faces of their bolder and brighter minds, will you make them satisfied with their lot? Or will you not rather transfer their leading from the hands of men taught to think to the hands of untrained demagogues? We ought not to forget that despite the pressure of poverty, and despite the active discouragement and even ridicule of friends, the demand for higher training steadily increases among Negro youth. There were, in the years from 1875 to 1880, 22 Negro graduates from Northern colleges. From 1885 to 1890, there were 43, and from 1895 to 1900, nearly 100 graduates. From Southern Negro colleges, there were, in the same 3 periods, 143, 413, and over 500 graduates. Here, then, is the plain thirst for training. By refusing to give this talented tenth the key to knowledge, can any sane man imagine that they will lightly lay aside their yearning and contentedly become hewers of wood and drawers of water? No. The dangerously clear logic of the Negro's position will more and more loudly assert itself in that day when increasing wealth and more intricate social organization preclude the South from being, as it is so largely now, simply an armed camp for intimidating black folk. Such waste of energy cannot be spared if the South is to catch up with civilization. And as the black third of the land grows in thrift and skill, unless skillfully guided in its larger philosophy, it must more and more brood over the red past and the creeping, crooked present until it grasps a gospel of revolt and revenge and throws its newfound energies athwart the current of advance. Even today, the masses of the Negroes see all too clearly the anomalies of their position and the moral crookedness of yours. You may marshal strong indictments against them, but their counter cries, lacking though they be in formal logic, have burning truths within them which you may not wholly ignore, O Southern gentlemen. If you deplore their presence here, they ask, who brought us? When you cry, deliver us from the vision of intermarriage, they answer that legal marriage is infinitely better than systematic concubinage and prostitution. And if in just fury you accuse their vagabonds of violating women, they also in fury might just as well reply, the wrong which your gentlemen have done against helpless black women in defiance of your own law is written on the foreheads of 2 millions of mulattoes and written in ineffable blood. And finally, when you fasten crime upon this race as its peculiar trait, they answer that slavery was the arch crime, and lynching and lawlessness is twin abortion. That color and race are not crimes, and yet they it is which in this land receives most unceasing condemnation, north, east, south, and west. So what I'm gathering is that it was a lot of critique about black people becoming educated and the building of the schools, the building of the colleges, and that it were a lot of people who did not believe that black people whether could achieve a higher education or even needed to achieve a higher education. And of course, this would be a very big topic of that time period because of the fact that this was the first time that it was accessible for black people. And I think that one of the other things that stands out to me is Du Bois's separation of the North and the South. And I think that for a very long time in America, there was this distinct separation between the experience black people in the North had and the experience black people in the South had. And it was harder to see the similarities and the commonalities in them during these time periods when that was closer to slavery. And the further out you get from slavery, I think it becomes a little bit easier to see the commonalities and similarities that existed. And that it wasn't necessarily just the South where the discriminations were happening so overtly. And I think that there's also a lot of hints of foreshadowing in the reading of Du Bois, because you can see how often he speaks on an issue and what might happen if the issue is not handled the right way. And 100 years down the line, you can see what has happened when the issue wasn't handled the right way. When he talked about how black people needed leaders and that they were going to find these leaders no matter what, and it would be better if they were trained, educated leaders to lead them right down the right path instead of demagogues. We can see how even though some of the leaders who emerged were not political demagogues, that with the rise of street gangs, the rise of the heroin epidemic and crack cocaine epidemic, that and the rise of the prison industrial complex, that there did rise up these black leaders that the community was looking for or starving for, and that there have been plenty of times when they were the people who should not be leading, and it was because of a lack of access to more appropriate leaders or more people suited that will be better. It was because of a lack of availability of people who are better suited to be leaders that some of these people rose to prominence. And that's even true, not even just for gangs and in the streets, but when we talk about political leaders that exist, when we speak about community leaders that exist in the country today, a lot of them have been people who were not of the highest integrity, that did not have the utmost concern of the black masses aligned with their ideology. And so for me, again, this just does a very good job of explaining how deep the issue of education has been for black people in this country. I will not say such arguments are wholly justified. I will not insist that there is no other side to the shield. But I do say that of the 9 millions of Negroes in this nation, there is scarcely one out of the cradle to whom these arguments do not daily represent themselves in the guise of terrible truth. I insist that the question of the future is how best to keep these millions from brooding over all the wrongs of the past and the difficulties of the present, so that all their energies may be bent toward a cheerful striving and cooperation with their white neighbors toward a larger, juster, and fuller future. That one wise method of doing this lies in the closer knitting of the Negro to the great industrial possibilities of the South is a great truth. And this, the common schools and the manual training and trade schools are working to accomplish. But these alone are not enough. The foundations of knowledge in this race, as in others, must be sunk deep in the college and university if we will build a solid, permanent structure. Internal problems of social advance must inevitably come, problems of work and wages, of families and homes, of morals and the true valuing of things of life. And all these and other inevitable problems of civilization the Negro must meet and solve largely for himself by reason of his isolation. And can there be any possible solution other than by study and thought and an appeal to the rich experiences of the past? Surely we have wit enough to found a Negro college so manned and equipped as to steer successfully between the dilettante and the fool. We shall hardly induce black men to believe that if their stomachs be full, it matters little about their brains. They already dimly perceive that the paths of peace winding between honest toil and dignified manhood call for the guidance of skilled thinkers, the loving, reverent comradeship between the black lowly and the black man emancipated by training and culture. The function of the Negro College, then, is clear. It must maintain the standards of popular education, it must seek the social regeneration of the Negro, and it must help in the solution of the problems of race contact and cooperation. And finally, beyond all this, it must develop men. Above our modern socialism and out of the worship of the mass, must persist and evolve that higher individualism which the centers of culture protect. There must come a loftier respect for the sovereign human soul that seeks to know itself and the world about it, that seeks a freedom for expansion and self-development, that will love and hate and labor in its own way, untrammeled alike by old and new. Such souls aforetime have inspired and guided worlds, and if we be not wholly bewitched by our Rhine gold, they shall again. Herein the longing of black men must have respect, the rich and bitter depth of their experience, the unknown treasures of their inner life, the strange rendings of nature they have seen, may give the world new points of view and make their loving, living, and doing precious to all human hearts. And to themselves in these days that try their souls, the chance to soar in the dim blue air above the smoke is to their finer spirits boon and guerdon for what they lose on earth by being black. I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. Across the color line I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas, where smiling men and welcoming women glide in gilded halls. From out the caves of evening that swing between the strong-limbed earth and the tracery of the stars, I summon Aristotle and Aurelius, and what soul I will, and they come all graciously with no scorn nor condescension. So, wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. Is this the life you grudge us, O knightly America? Is this the life you long to change into the dull red hideousness of Georgia? Are you so afraid lest peering from his high Pisgah between Philistine and Amalekite, we sight the promised land? And that brings us to the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. And I think what I'm going to do, even though it'll end up making this a shorter episode, is go ahead and end this episode and start fresh on the next chapter. Even though I'm not entirely sure we'd be able to get through the next chapter in one reading. Looks like we probably won't. But what stands out to me from this last passage that we just read is, again, I'm reminded of the strong desire that these Black people had to become educated, to learn, to be able to read. And I think that one of the things that can't be denied when we speak about where education and literacy rate and knowledge and graduation rates and all these things stand with Black people now is how tired as a community and as generations kept going on, Black people must have gotten in this fight to try to be educated, in this fight to try to gain knowledge, to try to gain education. If you trace it back to the very first set of people who came over here from and were enslaved, I would imagine some of the most intelligent and most knowledgeable of those Africans who were enslaved, a lot of them probably died because they understood the importance of liberty and the importance of freedom, and because their mind was too free to allow their physical body to be enslaved. And then so whatever education and knowledge they had in that generation was wiped out and whitewashed. And then when you think about any generations that existed in slavery, you could simply be killed just for being able to read. It was illegal to teach somebody Black how to read. So then that's the struggle that exists with learning and knowledge for those generations of Black people as slavery endures. And then once slavery is over with, you face the struggle of picking between working a job or trying to learn and get educated. The struggle between having your children work or farm the land or however you're making ends meet, or sending them to school to get educated. And we've seen how that was when Du Bois was speaking in previous chapters about his experience teaching, how that was a problem and an issue. And then also you dealt with the fact that there wasn't proper and adequate funding. It wasn't proper and adequate teachers available. And then that gets down to a place of brown versus border. Gets down to a place of separate but equal, and segregated schools, which had divested resources and had less equitable curriculum and teaching, and so you just see how this struggle has waged on through the years when it comes to Black people and learning and literacy. And the only reason that this struggle has waged for so long is because the white power structure understands the power that exists in Black people being able to be read and write and to be educated and to be knowledgeable, especially about the circumstances that they exist in. And so I want to encourage people to share this episode on whatever platform you're listening to it on. We will be back tomorrow with a new episode of Rockford Reading Daily as we begin chapter 7, entitled Of the Black Belt, as we continue reading The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. Holla at you tomorrow.